We are in our 6th week of our series on earth as it is in heaven. That means we're on day 6 of creation. And it happens to be Mother's Day. Mothers are that's my mom. And one of my youngest, not my youngest anymore because my nieces tend to be very prolific. One of my newest additions to the family, a great nephew named Drew, is who she's holding. My parents were both only children, and so we had no aunts or uncles or anything like that growing up. But now we all get together. There's about 75 of us. So my mother was very prolific as well. So in Mother's Day, what we're celebrating today is the idea of nurturing, right? I happen to be a mother, so I understand that whole understanding of what we think is good in this idea of nurture. This idea that you encourage your children, you support your children to experiment and to explore with everything that they have so that they can grow into the fullest capability that they're able in their adulthood, right? Now's the time to kind of explore with kids, to let them to fail sometimes, to watch their successes and to support them. And I get all that. In fact, my kids are still experimenting. In fact, so am I. So nurturing is something that's an ongoing thing, an ongoing way of life. And it's not just exclusive to mothers. It's an essence of all of us, right? All of us have that nurturing kind of quality within us. We celebrate that today in Mother's Day and that idea, and it's good that we're taking the time to set aside and say that this is important. So I'm glad we're doing that, but we also have to realize that not only is this not an exclusive role for mothers, that's my mom and my 4 sisters, by the way, but this is not exclusive to humanity as a species either, because as we've seen in these last days of creation, we know that all the other creatures in the world, right? The land creatures, the air creatures, the sea creatures, they all love and support their young. They all tend and care for things. Now, how much we recognize that sense of nurturing quality within us and how we extend that to other people in the world varies greatly. Like farmers, for instance, they care for the crops that they raise, right? Teachers care and tend to their students. Healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, all those folks, they care for their patients. Ministers love and support the congregation to which they've been given to love, right? And since we're all ministers, that pretty much includes all of us, right? That nurturing quality is an essential part of who we are, our natural way of being in the world. This is a picture of Catherine Foote, who was our Skype guest a couple weeks ago, who is a sheep farmer on Whidbey Island in Seattle. She also happens to be a UCC pastor as well. She runs a sheep farm, and she is now lambing this time of year. So this is a mother ewe and her 2 babies that she tends to. So we look all around us and we get that whole idea of nurturing, that loving, supporting kind of thing that allows us to become most fully what we're capable of becoming. That's what it's all about, this nurturing day. So for those of you who are actual mothers like myself, congratulations and have a great day for that. And for all of those who, like Eric likes to say, are born of mothers, that's pretty much everybody else. Celebrate that essential quality within you that has that nurturing strength that you can share with other people to give them the encouragement and the strength to become most fully who they were created to be. It's exactly this sense of the essence of ourselves, the essences of our being that our Genesis text speaks to throughout all of creation. But specifically today in day 6, we hear that God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them male and female. He created them. Now, the biggest phrase in that I hear is that whole issue of what it means to be the image of God. For the last 5 days of creating, there's been lots of wonderful conversation about all the great things that are happening in the midst of creation and that are coming into being. But none of them have been designated as the image of God before today. So exactly what is it we're looking for when we hear this phrase, the image of God? We were created that way. So what does that mean for us? John Philip Newell, who is a Celtic spiritualist who has written a book called The Book of Creation that we're using as a companion resource to this series, says that to say that we are made in the image of the divine is to say that what is deepest in us is of God. We've been saying throughout these 5 weeks that God is at the essence of all things that are created. And therefore, those creatures all stand as what we call a theophany of God, right? The revelation of God in the world. Well, as humans created today in day 6, we too stand as the theophany of God, a very specific theophany of God as the image of God in the world. Now, with that comes all kinds of interesting ideas about what that literally means to live into what the image of God is all about. In Genesis verse 28, then we hear, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves upon the earth." That clears things up. How many of you in the second question that we asked during our Lectio Divina, when we said we asked you to identify a word or a phrase that kind of stuck out for you, you didn't have to know why, but you had to identify a phrase. How many of you got kind of stuck on either the word subdue or dominion? A couple, a little bit more than a couple. Well, when we did this at worship team, it was a huge thing. And I myself personally get hung up on those two words, subdue and dominion. Because we're looking at a God that is the essence of all that is, and a loving God who created everything in love, right? So how can we think about that same loving God asking us to stand as the image of God in the world and have things like subdue or dominion over something? There's a little bit of a disconnect there. To me, there's a little bit of a negativity in some of those words, and I don't like associating that with God much. So I get stuck there when I read those phrases. But it was interesting when I went back to do some research, there was tons of opinions about what these two words meant. The first word, subdue, is kabosh in Hebrew, in the original Hebrew. How many of you ever heard the phrase, put the kibosh on something? Or the kibosh, or whatever. That's where this comes from. The action of conquering, or perhaps more politely, taming, as a farmer might tame a wild field in order to make it suitable for cultivating crops. Now, the first one, the whole thing of conquering, not great, but we can live with that. But this whole taming idea, this being able to make something capable of creating something else, that's not so bad. We can live with subjugate, right? Subdue. We can live with that word. It's not quite so hard. So that I kind of got over easily. But the next word was the word dominion. And that's the Hebrew word radach. And that literally means to rule in the sense of treading down, subjugating, or prevailing against. Not quite as easy to just get over. There are negative connotations to that, right? Treading down, subjugating, prevailing against. And it's that whole sense of it that might make us a little bit uneasy about comparing that kind of dominion with God, a loving God that created all of us, right? And like I said, there's tons of opinion about how this word should be translated. Robert Chisholm suggests that it's the harnessing of the potential of, or to use for one's benefit. That's a nuanced way of translating this word, and it's a good way. That it ends up giving some support and some positiveness to this idea of dominion. Robert Alter, who is a poet from the University of California in 1996, translated it hold sway. And the reason why some other folks have kind of furthered that explanation out, they say that literally it can be translated that point higher up on the root of a plant where its strength is centered. The idea being that as the winds come and threaten to uproot it, it has the centered strength to be able to withhold that, to hold sway, and be able to continue to grow and become the wonderful plant that it is. Well, as you can see, rule, subjugate, harness one's potential strength at the center of a plant, many different ranges of how you might translate this word. But the majority of the folks that I read about seem to agree with this man, Ernest Klein, who wrote a book called The Etymological Dictionary of Hebrew for Readers of English. Now, all of you have that on your bookshelf, right? I'm not much of a Hebrew scholar myself naturally, and Eric was out of town, so I rely on things like this. And what he says is that he translates it to tread, to rule, to have dominion, or to dominate. So that is kind of the consensus of a lot of the Hebrew scholars. So we have to listen to that. We have to pay attention to that definition as well as some of the other possibilities. And it's that concept of dominate that bothers me most. Dominion, kind of a realm of being in the world, I can live with. But dominate? That's fairly negative for me. So I'm wondering, what can I do with that? How can I think about not only a God who dominates the world and creation when I've always heard that creation is done in love, and then turn around and say, I need to be, as the image of God in the world, the dominator of earth. In some ways, that's kind of exciting, right? But in other ways, not so much. But there's a guy named Lee Kniep, who is a Baptist pastor out of North Carolina, who makes a suggestion that we are not asking the right question. What he suggests is that instead of trying to find a definition for the word domination or dominion that better satisfies our sensibilities of who we think God ought to be in the world, that instead we ought to be looking at how God rules. If the definition is rule, right, then we need to not throw out the word rule in order to do any integrity to the text whatsoever. But instead ask the question, not how do we rule, but how does God rule? This is about God. This is telling us something about who God is. And that's what we ought to be listening for. And so he suggests that we use Psalm 72, because he says that in verse 8 of Psalm 72, it's the first time that the word radah has been used in connection with God's activity in the world, not ours. And so he thinks it's incredibly perceptive to be able to look to this psalm and say, may God have dominion from sea to sea and from river to the ends of the earth. And know that we're talking about how God rules in the world. Not how we ought to, but how God does. And then the psalmist continues in Psalm 72 talking about how that rule takes place. For God delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. God has pity on the weak and the needy and saves the lives of the needy. From oppression and violence, God redeems their life, and precious is their blood in God's sight. When we turn the word dominion over to thinking about what it means for God in the world, we see a much more kindly and generous dominion, a way to rule and be a king, so to speak, over the land in a way that's generous and loving and caring and supportive. In other words, we can see the nurture of God through this word. It doesn't have to be a negative word. So looking at who God is through this text rather than who we are then helps us to understand what our role is as the image of God in the world. Then we're hoping that we rule the same way that God rules, in the same manner, with love and generosity and care for the earth. Not exploitation, not reckless consumerism, but love and nurture. This idea of giving life um, precedence in the world, supporting life and nurture and care for the earth, is something that's very central to the whole idea of Celtic spirituality, which we've been using to help interpret this text throughout this series. Celtic spirituality talks about that inner essence of God being in all things and that theophany, and how we then, as humans, are the theophany of God in the world as we rule the same manner that God rules, that loving, nurturing sense. For John Philip Newell, the extent to which we fail to reflect the image of God in our lives is the extent to which we have become less than fully human. We were created to be the nurturers of the world, the caretakers of the world. And to the extent that we fail at that, we have failed at being truly who we were created to be, which is to be fully human, right? For the Celtic spirituality, that essence means living into the capability that God gave you in creation, and taking that essence of God seriously and caring for the earth and loving the earth is who we are called to be. And when we fail at doing that, then we fail to become the true humans that God created us to be. And we can't blame that on God. And we can't blame that on our humanity. How many of you have ever said, well, I'm only human? In this sense, you can't use that as a blame for what's happening to you. What's happening is that as you fail to live up to your humanity for which you were created, that's when you fail at everything else. It's not because you're human that you're failing, it's because you refuse to be human that you're failing. And we see this in Christianity and the redemption for this falseness, this lack of recognizing our humanity in the world and what the capacity for that is in our world, in the person of Jesus Christ. For Celtic spirituality and for all of us Christians, the redemption of making very clear our separation from God by denying our humanity is held back together again and reconnected through the work of the Spirit in the person of Jesus Christ, right? Jesus reveals to us not only God's true self, but our own. Jesus stands as the one true human, no less of a human than any one of us, but the one true human who understands the falseness and claims God still. The one true human that lives into the full capacity of what that humanity brings with it. And in revealing that to us, we are able to see God's self in the midst of that as well, and be able to share and empower each other into living most fully into the humanity which we were given. J. Philip Newell says, in Christ we are shown that we are born of God, bearers of the eternal wisdom and beauty that were conceived with us in our mother's womb. What a beautiful image that is. Bearers of the eternal wisdom and beauty that we were conceived with us in our mother's wombs. Our very essence and core is that revelation of God in the world through becoming the fullest humanity that we are capable of being. He goes on to say that deeper than the failings of our lives is that blessing of our nature. It is to that blessedness that we are called to be reconnected. And that is done through that Spirit of Christ in the world. That redemptive power of pulling us back and reconnecting us to our Creator and to all the rest of creation, and remembering for ourselves what it means to be truly human is done through the person of Jesus Christ. Because at the foot of the cross, Christ reveals that it's not an easy path, but it's a path that was given to you as a gift from God. And that it's through the cross, through the sorrow and the pain and the suffering, that our true identities and our true humanities are most fulfilled. And God's love and generosity restores us together into one community of God, all of creation. So looking to Christ to reveal for us who God is and how God works in the world, helps us to become most fully human. Now today we're not only celebrating that whole nurturing idea, but how do we live that love of God then as the image of God in the world? We live it out most fully in our humanity by connecting with one another, by connecting with the earth in which supports and sustains us, by looking at the face of each other and all the creatures of the earth and seeing the essence of God in all of us. And we do that in conjunction for this time of year with the United Church of Christ, who has this National Mission for One Earth campaign that's been running since the day after Easter. There are 50 days in the Easter season, and so they've taken this time to be very intentional about who we are as the rulers, right, of the earth, of the birds of the air, of the creatures of the sea, and of everything that moves and has its being on the earth. What does that mean if we take that seriously? We've had 50 days to think about this, and next week at Pentecost, which the Easter season changes, we'll be able to kind of pull all this stuff together and talk about it. But in the meantime, as we partner, we need to think about how that love is enacted in the world. And it's not a passive thing. Nurturing for somebody is not necessarily passive. How many of you have ever stuck up for your kid? Exactly. How many of you have a best friend that you ever stood beside in times when you even knew that they could be wrong? Okay. That nurturing, that support, is something that we do as an advocate. It's not passive. In fact, most days, it's proactive even. We're standing up shouting from the rooftops about what we have faith in and where we put our support. And we do that as individuals each time that we do something to care for the earth. But we do it collectively as a community in the form of advocacy. And that's what we're celebrating today in ways that we can help our community. And I'd like to invite Connie Eberhardt, who is one of our presenters out in the foyer today, to talk to us about why she does what she does and how she connects that to the care of the earth.
Thanks, Chris. Out in the foyer today, there are some members of our congregation who are living into their faith by sharing information with us about their environmental concerns and ways that they like to nurture the earth. You know, I was thinking last week, Rebecca was such an inspiration to me as she was talking with the children. She expressed that, you know, for any one individual, it's almost overwhelming to think about how we can make changes in the environment because the concerns are so huge. But she also showed that if each of us does one small thing and we join together as a community, we can have a huge effect on the environment. And I don't know, I was kind of thinking that I like to ride my bike. And you know, if I could just commit to God and myself that I'll ride my bike just one additional time each week to run an errand, that is one small thing I could do in addition to, you know, recycling and the other things that we all do. And that by sharing this information, then maybe we can all join together and find small things that we can do.
So one errand a week on a bike.
Yeah, and Chris, did you know that studies show that for urban dwellers, about 40% of our errands are under 2 miles.
Wow.
So I thought that could work.
Yeah. I don't have a bike, so I could walk that.
You could walk.
Yes,
yeah.
okay. Well, there are multi-modes of transportation that leave a smaller carbon footprint, right? Like we could ride a bike to the bus, catch the bus, get off, walk a few blocks. I mean, it's lots of different ways. So. Yes.
And there are lots of organizations in our city that are trying to make improvements on that. For instance, there's an organization called Partners for a Healthy City, and we are joining forces with that organization to become a bike-friendly destination, and they are going to offer us free stuff.
Free stuff.
A bike rack for our grounds, and some bike tools in case we should break down on our bike.
Which never happens.
Which never happens, no. So that's all wonderful, and there are other advocacy groups that we can talk about if you stop by in the foyer. But really, this comes down to something bigger than biking. It's not about biking. It's about our mission here on earth. And it seems to me in that story of Genesis, that God is speaking to us directly. And God is asking us to be in community with our God, our Creator, and to also be in community with others around us in doing what we can to nurture all things. And so that is, I think, what's speaking to me. God is asking me to be a steward of the earth. And so this is a special day when we can think about that. And I'd like to thank the UCC and Countryside Church for helping me to think about the connection between my faith and care of the earth.
It's all relational, huh?
It's all relational.
It's all relational.
So I invite everyone to stop by.
Please stop by and see Connie and the rest of our supporters out there in the foyer on your way out. Thanks, Connie. Amen.
For this next Ministry of Music piece, we really encourage you to try to take this song outside of the context you may be familiar with it in. It's from a pretty popular movie from a while back, but instead, if you can listen to the lyrics, and if we're able to be the reflection of God in the world, how do these lyrics relate to looking at ourselves and who we're called to be?
Look at me, you may think you see who I really am, but you'll never know me. Every day, it's as if I play a part, but now I see if I wear a mask, I can fool my heart, but I'll never fool my whole heart. Who is that girl I see staring straight back at me? When will my reflection show who I am inside? I am now in a world where I have to hide my heart and what I believe in, but somehow I will show the world what's inside my heart and be loved for who I am. Who is that girl I
Creator God who knows us inside and out. Show us your love and compassion and generosity that keeps all of us going in the face of all we meet. Help us to reflect that image as the image of you in the world, becoming who we most truly were created to be. As we embrace all that creation has to offer, let us see how we are connected, to see that we are in relationship to all that is, and that caring for that relationship is part of the nurture our mothers taught us, the nurture and care and love that our fathers teach us, that our doctors and our farmers and our teachers and all those who nurture in ways that lift up creation teach us to care for the earth and for one another. Conrad Elness was one who, in his exaggerated welcomes, opened his arms and embraced all that was. It was easy to see the face of God in him. Help him to inspire all of us as we can be that exaggerated welcome for him now in the world as well. Be with all of us as we ask the questions why, as we fear, as we grieve, as we wonder who we're supposed to be. That exaggerated welcomes are the first step into reconnecting with all that we are. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Please stand.